Okay, so now we have our finished strips out here, and we need to trim them so that they're 1.5 inches wide. So if you take a look at these outer borders right here that are stitched in white thread, normally during a block we can use those to measure. Okay, in this instance we can't, because if we trim it to that, this strip is going to be too small when we go to sew it into our project. Because mind you, we're going to have a 1/4 inch seam allowance on this side, and we need a 1/4 inch seam allowance on this side. So the main goal when you trim up these strips, all right, is you're looking for a total width this way of 1.5 inches. So in this case, I'm going to take a little bit more off on this side up to here, because I don't have as much fabric on this side. You want your white stitch line to disappear in your 1/4 inch seam allowance. So you need to cut off a little bit on one side or on both sides to get this strip down to 1.5 inches. So each situation is going to be unique. You could have up here where you have an equal amount of fabric on both sides of that white stitch line. So I would take 1/8 of an inch off this side, 1/8 of an inch on this side, whatever you need to do to get the total width to be 1.5 inches. All right, so go ahead and trim all of your strips to be 1.5 inches wide total, and I'll meet you right back here. Okay, so I've got the main body of the quilt here, which again, I just love this. So much fun. I'm going to bring it down so I can work with it, and I brought in the small strip. Okay, and so I'm going to center the small strip on top because I want the phrase to be centered on the quilt. And you'll notice that I'm a little bit short of fabric on this one end. And if you remember back in the last video, I did a note saying future me. And when we were stitching this out, and I originally said allow 1/2 inch of fabric up on top, I added a note in the video to actually add about 2.5 inches to the top of the fabric as you lay it down, so that we would have plenty of fabric to go over the edge, but I didn't. Okay, so what I'm going to do, not a problem, easy fix to this. I cut another 1.5 inch strip of my fabric that I use for the border. I'm going to trim off the selvage edge, and I'm going to sew this right sides together straight across with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to give myself additional fabric. Now, if you're a perfectionist like I am, you know you're going to have a seam. Let's pretend that's a seam on this side, and there's not going to be a seam on this side. Well, I like to have it balanced, so I am actually going to measure out this, which I believe to be 1/2 inch, and I'm going to cut the fabric here and 1/2 inch away from the last little stitch there, and then I'm going to add more fabric. I'll just sew this basically back on with a seam. So in my quilt, I will be balanced. I will have a seam on this side and a seam on that side, so it will look like it's on purpose, even though it's not. It's just a fix that we're going to make this to be centered. And that way, if you have just one seam and you don't have it on this side, it's, in my mind, it looks like, oh, that's a boo-boo I'm trying to fix, which it is. But if I do a seam on this side, equal distance to what it is on this side, sew the additional fabric, make that seam, and then center it, it will totally look like I planned it. So that's what I'm going to do for the top and the bottom, and I'll meet you right back here and I'll show you what I've done. Okay, so I've got this piece, this small piece, right side down on my strip, and I'm going to put the needle on it, and I'm going to back tack, which just means go backwards and sew a few stitches. And now I'm going to sew the rest of the way with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I actually put my 1/4 inch foot on so that it would make it easier to guide the fabric, and I back tack at the end. And so now I've added a piece of fabric on that side. I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Fabric, right sides together. I can just put it right on the machine. Make sure I've got them lined up. A little bit on the top. There, that looks good. Don't forget when you start to do a few stitches and then back tack. Okay, here we go. These are really easy to add on. And then you can make the strip any length that you want and back tack. Okay, so now I have added a strip on the front and a strip on the back. So those are ready to go. I'm going to do the same thing with this strip. This actually has fusible on it, which doesn't matter at this point because it was left over. I cut it off the one end so I could have a seam on both sides. So the fact that the fusible there, I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to use it, back tack, and go forward. The main thing with these inner borders, don't forget to back tack, is that I want the design to be centered across the quilt, and then the long strips we're going to center on the two sides. The outer borders, which we'll get to in the next video, we're not going to be centering. We're just going to be stitching and filling up the entire border with that quilting. But these are a little bit more special, and I wanted to center them on the quilt, top and bottom and sides. Okay, I'm back tacking, and then I'm going forward. And then back tack at the end so that it locks those stitches in. Okay. So now I have a strip on the end of that one, and I have a balanced strip on the end of this one. Even though I didn't need it, I like the fact that they're balanced, so it looks like a block, so it looks like it was done on purpose. It was planned. All right, so now I'm going to take a look at my long strips, and I know I have plenty of fabric on the end. But again, my future me in the last video made a note I should have made it 2.5 inches long on the end of this. So I'm going to do the same thing with these long strips, and I'm just going to add another strip of fabric on the top part. So I will have plenty to work with. I won't need this much, but I went ahead and did it just so I have it for the sake of being able to have plenty of fabric to line it up properly. I'll show you when I get there. I'm going to be attaching the sides first. There, that looks good. I'm going to be attaching the sides first and then the top along the way. So this long one is now ready to go. And I got one more long one that I need to add a little bit of fabric to on the top. Again, fabric, right sides together, and sew them together. Really easy. So if you ever have to add fabric to a border, whether it's an inner border or outer border, it's really easy just to cut a strip, lay it down right sides together, and sew them together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and you magically have lengthened your border. And you have a very nice seam to go across. Okay, so those pieces of fabric have been added. Okay, so now I'm going to give these a quick press, and I'm angling the seam the way it kind of wants to go, which is away from the quilted block, so to speak. So I'm giving these a press so that they're going to lie perfectly flat in the quilt. And no one will really ever see that these have a seam. How about that? Let's do this one a little bit more. There we go. So those look good. So now I want to flip it over and do the same thing on the other side if it needs it. Now the larger strips don't need it because those are single pieces of fabric that were already there. But the shorter strips they need to be pressed. So again, I'm going to put the seam facing out. Minimize the bulk too that's on this quilted section because it has batting and it has the fusible. All right, so that is done. Okay, so now I've got my quilt, laying it down on a table. Actually, what would be better is if you lay it down on a bigger table or on the floor or on your couch so you can have the whole thing laid out. I'm going to do it right here because this way you can see it with the camera. And I'll show you how we're going to line this up. Okay, so I'm going to get some Clover clips. I love these because they don't pinch me or cause me to bleed on my fabric. All right. Okay, so I've got the long strip here and I've actually got it placed so the words are facing me, so it's like you're inside the quilt and you're reading it. You can do it either way you want, okay? You could do it this way, or you could actually face it so if you're outside the quilt, you could read in. What I thought would be kind of cool is if I face it this way, the words would start, you read up from the bottom, you read all the way here, it turns a corner, this is going to be read this direction. Then that side I would actually continue and have it read like a picture frame, top to bottom, and then the bottom I would have going straight across. So this side, the top, and the other side would read like a picture frame. So I think that's how I'm going to do it. All right, so if you're looking at the center of the quilt, you can turn your head to the left and you can read the phrases. You can read the phrase on top, and then you turn your head to the right and you read the phrase going down. And then at the bottom, I just have it going straight across the bottom. Or I could turn it upside down to be a complete picture frame. But I think that's how I'm going to do it. You can choose which direction you'd like your borders to go. It's up to you. You be creative. You can choose however you like to do it. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay this down. And I've pre-measured this, how far I think I need to have this strip laying down on the fabric. And I'm thinking it's about 1.5 inches approximately. So I can move that down where the quilting stops. It's about 1.5 inches. Okay. So I'm going to put a binder clip right on that. Now I'm going to keep it flat and I'm going to attach the border to the edge of the quilt so the edges are equal. They match up, okay? That way when we sew it together, it'll have a nice 1/4 inch seam and it will look great, okay? So I'm just flattening this out, going all the way down, lining it up with the quilt, and attaching the clip. Okay, and if you want to, you can triple check, fold it over, make sure it's in the direction that you want it to be. Whether you want it like a picture frame, or whether you want the phrase facing outward. It's totally up to you. It's your creative license to make this quilt your own. That's the fun thing that I love about machine embroidery projects and quilting, is you can make it your own. You can design it any way you want. You can make the directions face any way you want. It's up to you, which is great. Okay, so we're almost there. Gonna come down here and I'm gonna measure where the quilting ends is right about here. So it's about 1 inch. It's a little bit too much space because it ends at here. I'm looking at 2 full inches. So I want to bring it down about 1/4 inch. Not a problem. I'm just going to flip this up. This is easy to adjust, and this is why we do this now. Okay. So if I look at this, where the quilting ends, it was 1.5 inches. So now I want it to be 1 3/4 inches, which means I'm going to bring it down to about there. This is why we line it up and we adjust it now. Because if you had gone and sewn this and then measured, and you'd have to rip all of this out, not fun. So it's totally cool to line it up, measure, take the clips off, and make adjustments to where it's lined up. And if this is still off again by the time I get down, I'll do it again. Because this is much easier to deal with than ripping out stitches. Totally. Okay. Just have patience and enjoy the process. Even though borders are a little bit challenging, and honestly they're not my favorite part of making the quilt, making these blocks are, it's something that we can handle. Just go slow and steady wins the race. Okay. And we got one more to take off. And then it'll be the moment of truth. Alright, where's the quilting end? Right at that black stitch mark. We're at 1 3/4 inches, and I will take it doing a happy dance all the way home. Alright, so now we have the one side ready to go. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to sew this on, and then we'll go and we'll do the other side. I don't want this side to move at all in the process, so I'm going to sew it right now. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this rolled up so it's easy for me to control. Okay, I've put a 1/4 inch foot on my machine, one that has that guide on the right side to help me put the fabric up against so I get a good 1/4 inch seam. Okay, I'm going to put the needle on the fabric. My fabric is up against the guide, my needle is on the fabric. I'm going to scoot that Clover clip down, and I'm going to take a couple stitches. I am using a regular stitch length of 2.5. Okay, so I'm going to back tack a couple stitches, and then I'm going to start sewing, and just go slow. And what you're going to do is make sure you put the seam underneath of the fabric. You're going to maneuver this a little bit if you don't have a table to keep it flat. So you're just going to sew in small parts. Okay, if it gets too heavy, then you can move it. This is a big quilt now. And just go slowly, keeping the fabric up against that guide. If you need to put your hand under, you can, to help lift the weight off of it. And just sew your 1/4 inch seam. Go a little bit, stop, reposition. Okay, and just take your time. You're not in a race. All you want to do is be able to sew this slowly so you don't have to take it apart or redo it. Okay, now mine's coming off a little bit off the guide. Okay, that sometimes will happen when you're dealing with something that bulky. So I put the foot up, and I'm going to put the needle up as well. And then I can go back a few stitches and put that fabric back up against the guide. Okay, because it moves away from the guide because of the pull of the fabric. Then I can just keep stitching. If you're going slowly, you'll see when it starts to move away from that guide, and you can stop it, go back a few stitches, and catch it. Okay, just go slow and steady. Okay, moment of truth. Here we go. That looks cool. That's cool. Don't hit my hot iron. Okay. I'm liking that. That's a very cool border. Okay, if you happen to see any of the basting stitches, like right here, you can't really see them on camera. Remember when we made the border and we did a tack down line of this fabric to tack it down before we could quilt it? Remember that white basting stitch line? On mine, it's visible from here to here. I'm not going to rip this out to redo it. I'm just going to take my seam ripper and gently pull away those basting stitches right here to here that are showing. So if that happens to you on any of your projects where you happen to see those basting stitches, don't take this out. Just go ahead and pick those basting stitches out and they'll disappear and you'll be good. All right, so that looks good. All right, so now what I want to do is I want to flip the quilt around. And mind you, remember the direction that I had my phrase going in. Okay, so if I'm in the center of the quilt, I could read that phrase. I want to take the next long strip and I want to put it so it's like a picture frame. So again, if I'm in the center of the quilt, I can read that one and I can turn around and I can read this one. That will give the picture frame look around the quilt. Okay, we're going to do the same thing that we did on the other side. We're going to lay this down. We're going to pay attention to where that quilting ends. Flip it over so I can say it's okay. It's approximately there on the stabilizer. And I'm going to lay this down. Put a binder clip on it for just a second while I get my ruler. There's my ruler. And if I remember correctly, I was going for about 1.5 inches to 1 3/4 inches. I believe it was 1 3/4 inches. So I'm going to raise this up. I'm going to put my ruler. There's 1.5 inches. I'm going to make it just shy of 1 3/4 inches. Look for the end of the quilting. And then I'm going to put a binder clip in it. And I'm going to come over here and I'm going to measure this one. Just to see what it came out to be. It came out to be 1.5 inches. Okay. So let's go ahead and make this 1.5 inches. It may shift 1/4 inch or so as you're actually sewing it on. But the main thing is you're approximately where you want to be. Alright. Again, it doesn't have to be 100% perfect. I just want it close enough so visually it looks good. If I can get perfect, that's great. But if I can't, that's okay too. In my work, I had to be perfect. I was an accountant. That was my profession for, good grief, 38 years. And I was good at it, and I was perfect to the penny. I had to be. But this is not accounting. This is a fun, enjoyable craft where you don't have to be perfect. Good enough is good. Finished is even better. But you don't have to be perfect. Nope. No one else is going to see any imperfections that you may know are there. No one's going to notice it. Nope. I'm balancing the end of these out with fabric and seams just because in my mind I want the, visually, if there's a seam on the left, there's going to be a seam on the right. That's as far as perfect as I'm going to allow myself to be. It's just a visual thing. Don't have to do it. You just do what you want to do that makes it look nice for you. Okay, that's all you need. I highly recommend these Clover clips. They're so nice. I don't have to poke myself. Just again, I'm lining up the border with the edge of the quilt. Okay, I'm coming down here and I'm going to get my ruler and we're going to see how close we are. The edge of the quilting is approximately there. I'm 2 inches. What did I end up being over here? Just shy of 2 inches. So I'm going to go with it. I'm going to go with it. It's really close, and I'm happy with that. Yes, I am. Okay, so now, you know what we're going to do? We're going to sew this border on. Okay? Same technique as we did before. You got this. The most important thing is that when you put the needle on the fabric and the fabric is up against this guide, is you take a couple stitches and then you back tack to the end of the fabric. Alright, and then we just start sewing. So let's fast forward this and I'll meet you at the end of this quilt. Here we go. And when you're done, don't forget to back tack to lock those stitches in. Okay, let's see how I did. Okay. Moment of truth. Okay. Couple of the basting stitches I need to take out there. Not a problem. Couple there. This is coming together. Look at this. Looks good. All right, cool. Okay, so now what I want you to do is go over to your ironing board, and from the back side, I want you to press the seams. And normally throughout the quilt, we pressed them open. This time, just press them to the outside. Let it lie flat. Press them to the outside toward the edge. And then take your clapper and flatten those seams down. Don't forget to use a pressing sheet when you do this, because you don't want to get anywhere near the plastic underneath that could potentially melt. So I just put the seam down, and I can actually press it, and I'm not getting anywhere near those embellishments. Doesn't that look amazing? Oh my gosh. Seeing those borders actually on the quilt, it makes me so happy that I did this. I think that's just going to add that extra little pizzazz to this project. And then we'll have the outer borders on the outside. I love it. Okay, so we're not quite done yet. We've done the side borders. Now we have to do the top borders. Okay. So I'm going to straighten these out for right now. I'm going to show you what we're going to do next and why we're going to do it. Okay, you see I have my extra fabric that I added here. Okay, that'll look good. So now I have the smaller strip, which we have 2 of these, one for the top and one for the bottom. Yours may or may not have the seam. Remember, I told you you needed to add 2.5 inches from my future self. I wasn't able to do that. I only added 1/2, but look at this. It's literally going to look very nice having that seam on each side. It's not going to look weird at all. Okay. And yes, I have a seam over here and I don't have one over here. I'm going to just go with it. I'm just going to go with it and it's going to be fine. All right. Again, my project's not perfect. I just showed you one of my little non-perfect areas, but that's okay. All right. Now I am going to put this and just show you the next step. If we put this down, we still have these tails sticking out from the up and down. Okay. This fabric is going to go across and be sewn into the quilt like this. So in order for that to happen, we need to trim these tails so that they're equal to the quilt going across. Okay? What I mean by that is this. These pieces of fabric are now going to only be as long as the top of this quilt. So I put the quilt down, I put my ruler on it, and I am going to use my rotary cutter and I'm just going to trim off that excess. Mind you, I've got it lined up with the top of the quilt, and off they go. Okay. These little tails will be no more. There we go. And this is now totally part of the quilt. How about that? So I'm going to do the same thing at the bottom. I'm going to flip it around. Okay. I've got tails at the bottom of this. I'm going to line it up with the edge of the quilt. And I'm going to trim off that edge. Come over here and do the same. We are good. All right. And now those borders are now continuous with the quilt. Is this straight? Yeah. It's off just a teeny weeny bit. I want to make that straight. Okay. Okay, so now I can actually come down here and start with the bottom because the top and the bottom are going to be identical. Okay, so I have this one, which is going to be, again, the same size as the other one. So now I can literally line this up. Let's just get a few of these out. Okay. Don't need that many, but that's okay. So now I'm going to have this like a picture frame. You can switch this. If you want a true picture frame, you can have this going upside down. But realistically, someone's going to be looking at this on a wall. They can read the text going up. They can read the text going down. And then I'm thinking they'll want to read this going straight across. Happy haunting, take at your own risk. So I'm going to do them both, the top and the bottom, with the text facing in the right direction as if you were reading it on a wall. Okay, so I'm pretty much can line up the seams. They're about 1/8 of an inch away from the fabric. So I'm just going to use that and turn it right sides down. I'm going to put one in the middle. Okay, I can look again, that seam where I added my fabric is there. You might not have that, so just center your block or your border across the bottom of all the blocks. How about that? And just make sure that both pieces of fabric are level together. The ends are at the same point. Okay. Now I also want to pin it going across because I want this new border to sew across the other border. You're going to make those borders match up. Oh, look at that. I did need all those Clover clips. Ha! All right, so make sure that's flat, and that's going to go straight across like that. Don't worry about trimming it yet. Just we're going to do this and we're going to get it sewn on first. You can take a sneak peek and double check that you have your text going in the right direction. Okay, I'm just going to sew this just like I did those other two borders. It's just going to be shorter. Okay, so I can lay this out a little bit more. Okay, so I'm going to sew it just like I did the two long side panels. It's just a shorter panel. And I can actually have the weights of the quilt up there. The rest of it's sitting on me. And take this end one off and just realize that it needs to be straight with the edge of the quilt. Okay, there we go. Just take a couple stitches and then don't forget to back tack. Okay, so let's fast forward through and let's sew this border on. Okay, don't forget to back tack at the very end to lock those stitches in. Okay. All right. Let's see how we did. All right. All right, I got a couple basting stitches right here that I'll take out, but that looks good. I'm happy with that. All right. So these tails will also trim off after we've pressed this down. Not going to do it right yet. We're going to sew on the top, and then we're going to press these down like we did the sides, and then we will trim that off once it's all nice and flat. Okay, we're almost there. You got this. Borders are a challenge, but they're totally doable if you do like we're doing, and you go step by step. Okay? Don't be in a hurry when you do your borders. Take your time. Okay, I've got my quilt upside down, so I put my strip upside down so that I know when it's faced here at the top, it's going to be in the right direction. Okay, so then once I've got that, we'll do the same thing. We're going to flip it over and we're going to attach it. I like doing the middle first. Double check the ends. Yeah, that's good. All right. So I hope that you're enjoying this project, and I hope that you're really enjoying this addition of the inner borders, which is something that is a little bit different. It's unique. I like to be unique and change things up a little bit and do something that you might not normally do in this project. So because of that, I'm making it my own, you know? And I really thoroughly enjoy doing that. Because when you're making an awesome project, but you're making it your own. You're making it something that no one else has. You know, kind of a one-of-a-kind piece where you have your own little change. You have your own little areas that you've changed up, you know? And that makes it unique and special. And I love doing that. Okay? So I'm just going to do the same thing here. I'm going to sew this on with a 1/4 inch seam. And now don't forget to back tack to lock those stitches in. All right. Okay. Moment of truth. All right. I'm happy with that. That's cool. Okay, so now I'm going to take this to my ironing station here. And now I want you to iron this top border with the seams facing out or facing toward the top. Always facing out. That's how I do it. Do the same thing with the bottom border. Then use your clapper to try to flatten those seams as flat as you can get them. And I'll meet you right back here. Isn't this amazing? I am in love with this. Okay, so now we've got the top one pressed, and we have these extra little tails, just like we did on the top and bottom. So now we are going to trim these tails off, and I want to kind of do it so I'm facing that same direction, so I get these as straight as I can here. I got my ruler and my rotary cutter. Get the hot iron out of the way there. Okay. So now I'm going to line up the ruler just like that. And this piece of fabric seems to be a little bit shorter, but it's going to still work okay, because it's going to end up going into the seam allowance of the outside border. Okay, so I'm lining up the fabric. I'm lining up the ruler with the edge of the fabric. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut that tail off. Now you can see this is about 1/4 of an inch short, but I think it's going to be okay. And I'll make sure when I sew the outside border on that it still catches that fabric and goes all the way off and doesn't have a hole. Okay, so I think that will be fine. I've dealt with things like that before and it's come out fine. So I'm not going to worry about too much. If and perhaps it didn't, all I would have to do is unsew this piece from here to here and replace that piece. But I think it's going to be fine. Okay, so now I'm going to come over here and let's flip it around. Here we go. Okay, now I'm going to trim this. Also, lining the ruler up with the edge of the fabric and taking that off. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this bottom edge. Roll this up. Okay, like so. Lining the ruler up with the edge of this fabric. It looks like I'm going to have the similar problem down here. Not quite as big. That's okay. We'll see what happens when I add a side border to this. I think it'll still be okay. And if not, then I will show you at that time how I fix it. Because it will probably happen to you in the future as well on certain projects. This way you learn how to fix boo-boos and how to make them work. Okay? So I think we're okay. All right, isn't that cool? I'm in love with this inner border. Look at that. I really, truly am. Just loving this inner border. Can you see it? Let's put it under. There you go. I'm going to take my clapper here and just give that a little bit more of flattening. And I can do that on the top side, just not too hard because I don't want to smush the border in. Isn't that amazing? Look at that. Okay, you did it. You just added inner borders to your pumpkins and potions quilt. Isn't that cool? All right, so what do we have left on this project? We'll have a video or video series, just like this was a 4-part series. Will probably be another 4-part series for the outside border. Then we have embellishments. And then we have felt bats and lace bats. And then we're basically done. So this is going to be amazing. So stay tuned here on Jolly Molly TV for more fun and the last of these videos. This has been a fun project. We're almost done. And until I see you next time, take care and happy stitching. Bye-bye.